Yes, good morning. It's Tuesday, the 25th of August, 2020. Welcome back to the best on-ground weekday kickoff. My name is Pete Fairbairn. I'm your host, and the premise of the show, if you haven't seen or listened before, is very simple. I'm going to run through 5 of the biggest stories making waves in the world of sport this morning, and as always, I'm joined by one of the country's top journos. Today, I've got Christy Doran from rugby.com.au with me. How are you, Seedors?
Yeah, very well. Good morning to you.
Very good morning to you. Thank you for getting up nice and early for this one. And as a reward, we're going to start with our first story in the game you cover, rugby union. It's a cracking yarn from Matt McIlwraith in The Guardian, of course, the former Crusaders and Wallabies media manager working closely with Robbie Deans there. He's written a piece looking at the way that Rugby Australia has stood firm in demanding 5 teams in any trans-Tasman Super Rugby competition that is to move forward in either 2021 or 2022. New Zealand Rugby initially weren't keen on any more than 2 to 4 Australian teams, but now we've seen in recent days that New Zealand Rugby is in fact open to the 5 teams. And McIlwraith kind of praises Rugby Australia chairman Hamish McLennan for standing his ground and says that he's emerged as a real winner from the saga. In general, New Zealand Rugby, the financial situation of the game there really relies so heavily on the All Blacks and their ability to create commercial revenue. The other thing McIlwraith talks about is the fact that New Zealand Rugby was so firmly entrenched in the camp of Augustine Pichot in the race for the World Rugby presidency. However, Pichot came off second best behind incumbent Bill Beaumont. So McIlwraith suggesting that New Zealand Rugby politically has been undone on a couple of occasions this year and that perhaps their grip on the game is starting to fade a little bit. Would you agree with that assertion, Christy?
The other aspect there not included is the fact that just recently it was the Six Nations sides up in the Northern Hemisphere that really were the curtailing of this Nations Cup, which was going to be the big saviour of global rugby, not just in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, but it was going to pour a lot of money right throughout the game. It had support from New Zealand Rugby, support from Rugby Australia under Raylan Castle at the time. And unfortunately, the Six Nations sides really just bombed that because they weren't prepared to make any concessions when it came around the global calendar, around the Six Nations, and it was very much a self-interested move. That is another prime example of New Zealand Rugby not having as much influence as they would hope for. They're absolutely still seen as the bee's knees, the A-listers when it comes to the actual running of the game, to the game itself, to the game they play in heaven. But in terms of the political influence, yeah, he's actually made a fair point that New Zealand Rugby doesn't have as much influence as it would, and it's probably to do with the large amount of money that's running around rampant in the Northern Hemisphere.
And of course, we've seen Stephen Tew, the long-standing New Zealand Rugby CEO, step down in the last 12 months. We've also seen a change of head coach at the All Blacks. Steve Hansen stood down and replaced by Ian Foster, who ironically is one of the people who said in recent days, oh yeah, we actually are open to 5 Australian teams. So we'll continue to follow that story. There's plenty still to play out there, but I thought it was a particularly astute observation from Matt McIlwraith. Our second story today, and like McIlwraith, the first time we've heard from this author on the Best On Ground Weekday Kickoff, and it's from commentator Waleed Ali in The Age with a brilliant column about the Footy Frenzy that we've seen in the AFL over recent weeks. Of course, there's been AFL football most nights of the week for the last 3 or 4 weeks as that competition tries to ensure they get their fixtures away with AFL players all based in hubs around the country and no action, of course, happening in Victoria. It's been a massive hit with fans, and we know that during these tough times with the state of Victoria and lockdown, the ability to turn the footy on every night of the week for a long time there was a significant boost. But Waleed Ali is saying, yes, it's been a masterstroke. Yes, it's guaranteed the viability of a precarious campaign. Yes, it's been fresh and exciting and a relief. But yes, it should never, ever happen again. The reason he says is simply that the AFL is a competition where the integrity of selection and playing your best team in every match is at the very core of that competition. He compares it with other sports which often play midweek fixtures, US sports like basketball and baseball, where the physical exertion isn't the same as something like the AFL, so players can back up and play every couple of days. He looks at football and the world game and the fact that, a team, say in England, a top team might play in 4 different competitions if you include domestic cups, European competition, and how the battle for them to rotate their team and choose who plays what game is actually a critical part of the narrative. But he says that in AFL, you play your best team every game. That's at the core of the competition, and footy frenzies don't allow that to occur. Do you think Waleed Ali's right here, Christy? Does it reduce the integrity of the season if you have a footy frenzy?
I don't. No, I don't think he's right, actually. I think he's somewhat off the mark. I think what AFL coaches have said in recent weeks and what has been put to it as well is that they've actually, a lot of them have supported it. But number 2, I think that you've found that going forward, you wouldn't just have a backup of 2 days. It'd be 3 days. It would be, you might have a game on a Thursday night, and then it would be the following, Tuesday or Wednesday. They would try to space them out as best as possible. But in terms of the integrity of the game, just to compare it to rugby, we saw the Brumbies make 16 changes on the weekend and come out and pump the Waratahs. They beat them very well indeed and made a raft of changes, and it showed the depth of their squad. I think you can see right across AFL, sides that tend to do well have strong squads. What better opportunities to showcase your young talent, to bring them forward? I think taking that point forward around, do you just play the AFL comp and that's all? We've seen in recent weeks and months the rugby union look to do an FA Cup styled format where you might bring a second competition which involves amateur clubs and professional clubs. We've seen that in football. Why not see that in AFL? Why not see that in AFL? And then we'll put that to the test and we'll see. And also, I think that the reality or the suggestion that basketball players don't put themselves physically, exert themselves as much, I think could be wrong. You only have to be 1 or 2% off and you would lose a game in the NBA. So I don't think he's quite right there. Whether or not you would see the ratings remain as high for AFL if you continued to have this frenzy. I think one of the things that worked for them was almost every night that a game was on. If you started to mix and match and do every second night, might then become confusing.
And we're going to talk broadcast and ratings in just a minute. I know in your household, The Masked Singer was getting a pretty big run, but at the risk of damaging the bromance, I'm going to disagree with you on this one. Waleed Ali's article has changed my mind a little bit, and I look at the integrity of a game where athletes run up to 15 kilometres at a time. I think their recovery has been heavily aided this year by the fact that they've been in hubs, in environments where their diet and their preparation and recovery can all be monitored essentially 24/7 by the clubs, as opposed to usually when they would return to their home environments. I completely understand some of the points you make. I think showcasing your depth is critical, and I don't think AFL is the exception to the rule by any stretch of the imagination. But I think long term, you want to see the superstars of the competition playing in every single game, and you don't want to see Geelong without Dangerfield. You don't want to see Richmond without Dustin Martin, and you certainly don't want to see some of the young stars of the competition like Ben and Max King being rested for games either. But I take your point. I'm going to go in a different direction on that one. Our third story today comes from John Stensholt in The Australian, and it does look at the TV ratings for the AFL and NRL seasons via Foxtel and also incorporating Kayo Sports, Foxtel Go and Foxtel Now. The Kayo Sports streaming service is actually accounting for more than 30% of Foxtel's major football match audiences, which is kind of the first time we've seen that data released by the pay TV operator. Live NRL audiences on Fox League are up 18% compared to the corresponding rounds last year. And in the AFL, Fox Footy channels, live matches for the first 12 rounds of 2020 are up 34% compared to the same rounds last year. They're fantastic figures for those competitions and for that broadcaster. But are we going to see those big ratings stay beyond this season, or do you think fans just start going back to games when the COVID restrictions ease and the figures revert back to what we've seen in years gone by?
I think we could see a bit of both, to be frankly honest. One thing that the streaming platforms have allowed for is much more accessibility, to be able to be a little bit more free with how you you interact and how you consume your sport. You can be on a train or a bus. Not that many people on trains or buses at the moment, but you understand the gist. You can kind of be anywhere as long as there's some internet and be able to tune in. It's interesting that they release these figures now. I know that they're not releasing the rugby figures because they don't want to pump up, to say that there's actually more people probably watching Super Rugby than just the hardcore Foxtel from the box figures, and they're not taking into consideration at the moment KO. They're good numbers, undoubtedly, and it probably helps when you have a frenzy, when you know that it's on every night, but when you can't leave. We all know that the Melburnians love their AFL and they can't leave at the moment. So what else are you going to be doing than watching some sport, allow you to free your minds? So I think we'll see at some point in time those figures slightly plateau out and perhaps decline a little, but they're great figures nonetheless, and they're strong ones for Foxtel, who really desperately need strong figures coming out of their two premier sports, rugby league and AFL.
And of course, we know that the KO package is, significantly smaller price point for subscribers, and that Foxtel, in essence, cannibalised their own market a little bit when they released that product. They've now released the binge product, which is the entertainment version again, and less set-top boxes and traditional Foxtel subscribers than years gone by. But they are great numbers. And what I'd like to see personally is a little bit more ingenuity and a little bit more risk-taking in the broadcast itself. Continue to look to incorporate different elements of broadcast and not rest on your laurels there, and make them as innovative as possible. Our penultimate story comes from a friend of the show, Brad Walter, at NRL.com today. And mate, I thought this was a cracking yarn, some fantastic analysis and some great insight from a number of different recruiters and high performance and strength and conditioning experts in the game. The crux of the article was that it was talking about the secret to Cameron Smith's longevity and why more stars in the NRL are playing for longer. Cameron Smith, it's been nearly 20 years, 423 games he's played. He's 37 years of age, Cameron Smith. He's currently the oldest player in the NRL, but there are 60 others who've turned 30 or older who've played this year, which is just a phenomenal stat. We've seen guys like the Morris twins. We know that Isaiah Soliola at the Raiders is likely to get another year. Benji Marshall may well go around again for the Tigers. And as I say, the likes of Troy Thompson, who worked alongside Cameron Smith for his first 10 seasons at the Storm, and has also worked with him in the Maroons camp and with the Kangaroos, says that ultimately, the longevity of Smith and some of these other veterans comes down to how well they train and how well they look after their body, their preparation, and the fact that they're willing to go above and beyond to look after themselves in between matches. Chrissy, has the maturation of NRL players actually made it a better competition for fans? And with technology continuing to improve in the performance side of things, are we going to see a similar trend like this in other sports and older players playing for longer?
Well, in terms of other sports, you only have to look at someone like George Smith. And if you don't know who George Smith is, he's one of 10, 11 Centurions for the Wallabies who only just retired at the age of, I think, about 40. But he's the sort of bloke that would turn a 4-week injury into a 1-week injury and would somehow actually end up taking the field. Wasn't regarded as the greatest of trainers, but just somehow kept on having this ability to back up, go again. And it was one of the outstanding players of the 21st century. And you look at it a little bit similar to Cameron Smith in the sense that this guy has hardly ever got an injury. Ironically, he's got one at the moment, but he's got this ability to back up. And I think it was Troy Thompson who said that genetics does play a part in this. But there's no doubt that these players, they have this amazing ability they might not be at the physical condition of where they once might have been, but they have this ability to be able to be 2 steps ahead of everyone else in the game, and their intuition of knowing where to be, to pop up, to maybe cheat every bit, take the letter of the law into your own hands, but really be innovators in itself in the game, has allowed these players to continue to go far beyond where you might have been able to 20 years ago. Sports sciences have played a huge part in keeping players on the field, though, and you only have to look at the many physios, the physicians, the sports scientists within a sports program to know that these guys and women often have great people looking after them and looking after their absolute every need.
I think if you look at the 10 oldest players in the history of the NRL, 7 of them have played in the last 10 seasons, which says that there is a bit of a trend tracking that way. See someone like Tom Hawkins absolutely turning back the clock in the AFL. I know Carmichael Hunt has obviously picked up a niggle, but his influence on a young New South Wales Waratahs team certainly can't be underestimated. And for what it's worth, I love seeing the more experienced guys hanging on that bit longer and as you say, playing a bit smarter in terms of how they exert energy. Our final story today, we head to the boardroom, a place that you're not necessarily all that familiar with, and myself either, but certainly there's been a bit of musical chairs when it comes to chief executives and some of the top sports in Australia over the last couple of years. We've seen the likes of David Gallop, Todd Greenberg, Raelene Castle, James Sutherland, Kevin Roberts, all leave important roles as chief executives of national sporting organisations. Well, one of the first dominoes has fallen there in that former Cricket Australia Chief Executive James Sutherland was announced yesterday as the new CEO of Golf Australia. He replaced Stephen Pitt, who resigned earlier this year after 11 years. Sutherland, of course, led Cricket Australia for 17 years and some phenomenal achievements there, not only in regards to the professional game, but also he oversaw a 10-fold increase in revenue, a 500% lift in corporate sponsorship, 250% spike in participation, significant boost in female participation. And, you know, it seems like a very good appointment for golf, which has traditionally struggled to tap into a wider market. John Pierrick in The Age, I should acknowledge, writing this article this morning. We've also seen across the ditch Dylan Cleaver in the New Zealand Herald speculating that the former Rugby Australia CEO Raelene Castle may well be in line to become the next chief executive of Sport New Zealand. We know that Peter Miskimmin is leaving that role at the end of the year, and all indications are that the next CEO would be a woman. With Cricket and Rugby Australia still looking for permanent CEOs, what's going to be the next domino to fall in this race, Christy?
It's hard to know from a cricket perspective. I'm not quite closely inside that to know, but in terms of from a Rugby Australia perspective, Rob Clark is doing and I have to be a little bit careful, but I also can perhaps speak with a bit of knowledge around the situations that Rob Clark has always been pretty adamant by the fact that he wants to, this is a short interim role, that he wants to do the best job he can for Rugby Australia, get a broadcast deal firstly for the remainder of this year, which he'd done. Secondly, for the test matches, which is due to be played in October and November and perhaps early December too. And thirdly, secure the game's broadcast future and the viability and the sustainability of the game beyond 2020. And then he'd do what he wanted to do previously, and that's have a bit of a break and a bit of a holiday. But I know that Hamish McLennan has the chairman, who's done an outstanding job in his few months that he's been at Rugby Australia, is very keen to have Rob Clark stay on. So whether or not he will, we will wait and see. But so there could be another chief executive in the months to come, perhaps at the end of the year, if Rugby Australia secures their broadcast future. As for cricket, well, we've just seen the Australian cricket side go off to the UK for a little while. They're undoubtedly going to be looking to have someone in, and probably before the cricket season starts, the summer starts in Australia, you'd think too.
Yeah, Nick Hockley's, from all indications, seems to be doing a good job in the interim CEO's role there. We've obviously got Andrew Abdo at the NRL, who is technically still the interim CEO, but I think that's just a fait accompli that he will get that job on a permanent basis. Certainly his chairman, Peter V'landys, seems very impressed with the work he's done. Christy, it's been great to catch up this morning. 5 fantastic stories to look at. Hope you have a fantastic day and look forward to having you back on the Best On Ground Weekday Kickoff soon.
Many thanks, Pete. Cheers.
Tomorrow, a bit of a treat. We're going to cross up to far north Queensland and we're going to speak to Phil Lutton, who's in Townsville and is going to be covering the Jeff Horn and Tim Zhu fight. That's going to be a bit of a treat. Look forward to catching up with you then. Take care. You've been watching and listening to the Best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. See you later.